Welcome, I'm Chad Koulis, Executive Director of the Midway Chamber of Commerce. Thanks for joining us for part one of our 5-part Economic Development Summit series, gone virtual this year. Today's topic is careers, which is a very important one. UPS is one of our sponsors. I don't believe Henry's on the call right now, but UPS is a company that cares very deeply about careers, and I feel like everybody I know who works at UPS started there when they were about 19 or 20 and end up retiring there. So that tells you something about the longevity and the loyalty that they have there. So it's a great place. They are oftentimes hiring. When you're at home, you've probably been noticing a lot of UPS trucks rolling down your street. So it's a very important service right now. Just a friendly reminder, it looks like everybody is on mute. Stay that way if you can. And if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. We will have time for questions afterward. And at this point, I will introduce our moderator and our sponsor today from the Port Authority. Please welcome Tanya Bauer. Are you still on mute?
Yep, there we go. Good morning. Thank you, Chad, and thank you all for joining us on this glorious Thursday morning. As Chad mentioned, I'm Tanya Bauer with the St. Paul Port Authority and a proud member of the board of the Midway Chamber and the co-chair of our absolutely amazing Economic Development Summit Planning Committee with my colleague and fellow board member, Tony Mendoza. St. Paul and the region for over 85 years, and our core purpose is to improve people's lives through building vibrant economic communities. We do that through our mission of creating quality job opportunities, increasing the tax base, advancing sustainable development through our work in management of St. Paul's Harbor, as you can see with the beautiful picture behind me, our work in brownfields redevelopment, and statewide consulting services and energy financing programs. So speaking of financing programs, I really wanted to take this opportunity to share some exciting news right hot off the press from the St. Paul Port Authority. The Port Authority was selected as an approved lender for a deed guaranteed loan program, and we have committed $1 million in funds to provide small business loans to St. Paul businesses impacted by COVID-19. A quick snapshot of the loan parameters are these are loans for up to $50,000 that have a 3-year term and a 2% interest rate, interest-free for 3 months, no payment due for 6 months, and no prepayment penalties. Businesses must demonstrate a negative impact caused by COVID-19. Again, this is not a grant, but a very low interest loan and with very favorable terms. I'll certainly put some additional program details and information in the chat with a link to our website. But on to today's event. The Port Authority is honored to sponsor this event on a topic that is near and dear to us all with our friends at UPS. I have the pleasure of introducing this morning's speaker, Ling Becker, Director of Ramsey County Workforce Solutions. So a little bit about Ling. Ling is the Director of Workforce Solutions for Ramsey County. She oversees a department of 80 staff who deliver workforce services and programs to residents and businesses of Ramsey County. Prior to that role, Ling was the Executive Director of Vandus Heights Economic Development Corporation, serving the Northeast Metro business community. In that role, she led several award-winning workforce partnerships with local school district and community colleges. Ling is a graduate of the University of Minnesota Morris and holds a master's degree in public administration from Syracuse University, where she was a Woodrow Wilson Fellow. In 2008, Ling was a recipient of Minnesota Business Magazine's Real Power 50 Award. So no further ado, I'd like to introduce my colleague and dear friend, Ling Becker.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Thumbs up, Chad? You can hear me? Okay. Thanks for joining us this morning. I'm really excited to be here to talk to you about workforce and career issues, especially as they pertain to the Midway area. I'm going to go through a real quick summary about just Ramsey County in terms of the COVID-19 situation and kind of roll that into the Charis funding that the county has received. I felt like that was an important base setting set of information for you folks. And then we'll dive into some data around understanding the Midway and careers and workforce trends. And then I'll be talking just real briefly about our new job board and then take some time for questions and discussion. So right now, all our career force locations are closed due to COVID-19. I just wanted to make sure folks knew that we are still providing services to residents and businesses through phone and through our website. We'll talk much more in depth about this, but 24% of Ramsey County has applied for unemployment right now. The CARES Act, various iterations of it have increased unemployment benefits, and I'm sure most of you have been following a little bit about the different variations of the pandemic unemployment programs, but we could talk about that if anyone has interest. We are definitely finding there's more impacts on the people of color and young adults, and we'll dig in more about how that affects the Midway in particular. And we're already seeing and anticipating more need for public assistance services as well as dislocated worker services. And we'll be moving more toward virtual services. So I wanted to give real high level information, and then we'll kind of like filter down to the Midway area. But this is data that is as recent as May 17th, so just a few days ago. As you can see, the trends of unemployment, I mean, it is astronomical. As I mentioned, about 24% of our Ramsey County 2019 labor force is currently, has applied for unemployment. Now, this doesn't mean that everybody has received unemployment, but these are the applicants. In addition, roughly 1 in 3 Black workers have filed for unemployment. In Minnesota, I think this is an interesting race set of statistics, and I can provide the full slide deck to Chad to share with you folks. But we're definitely seeing a disproportionate impact on our Black and Asian and Hispanic communities, certainly. More women have filed for unemployment than men. I think that's probably not super surprising, knowing the types of industries where have been impacted, but it is important to note that you know, like for instance, you know, we operate the public assistance program generally for mothers, single mothers with children. And so we're seeing a lot of that increase. And as we think about as a county, issues around homelessness or food insecurity, you know, the kind of who that's going to be impacting. Like normally when you think about our homeless population on our shelters, they're more geared toward men, honestly. And so like this has kind of caused some shift in thinking about the needs in our community. This is really important too, as we talk about the Midway. I wanted to set the frame around generally younger people are the ones filing for unemployment. And that is not probably surprising to you. Again, understanding the industries that they're being impacted. But you're gonna find out in a few minutes here that, you know, the Midway is generally a younger population of folks. And so, you know, this is gonna be significant for the Midway area, knowing that it's probably hitting your area more disproportionately. And then I pulled some Ramsey County data by age, and I guess it's hard to, you know, we're flying through these pretty fast, but you see in Ramsey County that, you know, the big bar of the 25 to 34. So in our county, this is, you know, we are in trend with the statewide data that most impacted are the folks that are younger. So, you know, if you would add up everybody from 16 to 34, I mean, you know, you see where the impacts are on our younger population. And then I also just had the race data for just for the county, when previously we were looking at the statewide data. Again, you know, similar patterns, the Black, Hispanic, Asian impacts. You know, Ramsey County is pretty representative of what's happening statewide. I also wanted to share a little bit about where industries the job loss is. I don't think this is really surprising to most folks, but this is some data, and I can make sure Chad has the link to this. This is a really interesting website that actually breaks things down by census tract. And so I only pulled it by the county, but this is saying that about, you know, almost 26,000 jobs have been lost due to COVID, and they're talking about low income jobs. And so the definition of that is these are jobs that are under $40,000 a year. And so you're seeing that the industries that are most impacted would be accommodation and food service, healthcare and social assistance, retail trade, arts and entertainment. And as we look at the Midway, I want you to remember those industries, because you're going to see that there's a big correlation that these are your predominant industries in the Midway. And so that impact could be disproportionate on the Midway than even in other parts of, Ramsey County or the state. And we can have a conversation more about that too. I wanted to just kind of provide lots of information so we could kind of have a little level setting. Really, another thing to and this is why we're kind of experiencing the disproportionate in the people of color probably experiencing unemployment. You see that, workers of color are really overrepresented in these low wage jobs that are very vulnerable to the pandemic. So when it comes to restaurant and food service or merchandise stores, clothing stores, gas stations, nail salons, I mean, these are the industries that many of our people of color are working in our community. And so, they're being impacted in multiple ways. I'm going to switch gears just slightly to talk about the Charis funding that the county had. And so I think that helps to maybe understand why we're making the response that we are. On April 22nd, the county received $96 million from the U.S. Treasury. This was based on a formula allocation through the CARES Act that was for state and local governments. Any county that is over 500,000 in population received an allocation, and only Ramsey and Hennepin were the only counties that received this direct allocation out of the CARES Act. We are a county of 550,000 residents, and so we kind of eke through the baseline threshold there. The state of Minnesota was also allocated $1.871 billion, and then Hennepin received the $219 million. And this money has some really strict restrictions, and so it's good for people to know what these dollars can be used for. They really can only be used on the public health response, for example, and our county has spent a lot on that public health response, whether it's around food, homelessness, food insecurity, or even just PPE and public health needs in our care facilities and our correction facilities. These funds cannot be used for anything that was in our existing budget as of March 27th. And and we have to spend them down by December 30th. And so you can see how these dollars are a little bit challenging because we're already, nearing the end of May here, and we just received this allocation. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about kind of what our plans are. So our county manager is recommending this to the board on Tuesday. He's divided the money into two chunks, with $40 million being set aside for just our emergency response. And we've already incurred, I would say, last estimate I heard was about $10 to $12 million as a county in this response, and we're just, partway through into it. He's also designating $56 million to be split three ways. I think all of them would be of interest to you, but probably a couple more than others. $26 million is going to be put toward financial assistance, which is going to be helping, folks that are really the ones that are most in need around food assistance, rent assistance, and the emergency assistance program that we have in the county. There will be $15 million being put towards small business assistance, and a lot of that we're trying to gear toward micro businesses, and I think that's impactful for the Midway, because you're going to see you have a lot of micro businesses in your community, and they're right now trying to get that program up and running, and I would anticipate some information is going to come out in the next few days around that business assistance. And it wouldn't be a loan, it would be a grant, and we're trying to make sure that there's a lot of outreach to ensure we're hitting those small minority-owned businesses in Ramsey County. And then, $15 million around workforce assistance. And so I'll go into a little more in depth on that workforce piece here. So the CARES funding is really intended to close gaps and not pay for things that are in our existing funding or our existing programs, and even our potentially new funding allocations. With so many people being unemployed right now, I anticipate we will get additional dollars around, say, for instance, our existing dislocated worker program that serves people who've been dislocated from their job. What these dollars are aimed at is sort of filling in a gap, especially over these next 6 months, on things that we feel might help mitigate the impact of COVID rather than creating like brand new sustainable programs that, obviously because the money ends at the end of the year. And so based on some of the data I had shared with you, we're really interested in making sure we're mitigating impacts on those most impacted folks, which include the, Black, Indigenous, people of color, the youth and young adults, people with disabilities and veterans and older adults, people who already had barriers to employment previously, just have now even greater barriers to employment. And so our key areas for the funding is going to be to increase access, both in person and virtual. This is a little tricky because of the current, stay at home or, stay safe order. And, we don't know how much in person we are going to be able to do, but we anticipate kind of converting several library spaces to be temporary career labs in the community very quickly here. And then also providing a lot more virtual career navigation services. We're also planning on supporting youth and young adult programs with some gap services. As you know, you're probably familiar with a lot of youth employment programs out in the community. There's probably a good half a dozen of them that are pretty vibrant. They employ youth in the summer, particularly youth that are somewhat at risk. They provide a lot of leadership and different types of customer service training and entrepreneurship training. And we want to make sure they have what they need to hopefully still execute some sort of program this year. And in addition, we're trying to create more programs that are actually focused in the community around those impacted populations. We're also working on digital equity. Having access to equipment and Wi-Fi is now going to be another area where somebody could experience inequity. And when you think about right now with so many people being on unemployment, the best thing they could be doing is to be retooling and doing some training. And if you don't have access to those types of tools, you're going to fall further behind. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how, we anticipate opening some training spaces in the next couple months, certainly in the Midway area, in addition to career labs, and then helping some of our community-based organizations convert more of their training to virtual. And then we also, this last bullet around community-driven innovation, we set aside some money for the community to come up with some ideas. We're partnering with Center for Economic Inclusion to work on a innovation fund. And I think there's a lot of, in my work, especially up and down University Avenue, it is shocking how many youth or how many work and employment service providers there are doing different types of work, right? Like they might not be all doing like, hey, we're going to get someone a job, but they might be providing clothing. They might be helping, with financial literacy, or there's a lot of like all parts of kind of the cogs in the system. And I think we want to make sure that we're funding some of that so that, when this money is gone after December 30th, one of the goals is that we'll have invested in some things in the community that can kind of have sustaining power. So if people have converted a training or, invested in something to further a program they already have, that they continue to keep that collateral after December 30th. So that's a real high overview of the CARES dollars. We can talk more about that, but I felt like I'd be remiss to not at least mention, this large amount of money coming out to Ramsey County here in the next few weeks. If you work with organizations that you think might be good candidates for some of these dollars, please do send, maybe, I'll have my email at the end of the slide deck, but we want to make sure they hear about these solicitations. And it's going to be a fast process. We're able to kind of do more rapid procurement, but we want to get this money out to the community to be able to serve the residents. So we'll switch over now to some Midway workforce analysis. In terms of the area that I kind of honed in on, it's these 3 zip codes, 55114, 104, and 103. And this is just a map of the area that we kind of did most of our research around. So the labor force participation rate is actually really high in this area. It's higher than Ramsey County as a whole. You're at about a 72 or almost 73% labor force participation rate. Of the folks that are between 25 and 64, 44% of them actually have a bachelor's degree or higher, which is good. But I think the staggering statistic that we have to sit with is that 12% of your residents lack even a high school diploma. And when it comes to the COVID situation, as we like analyze everything through that lens now, right? People without a high school diploma are going to have a harder time, you know, getting their foot in the door for a job. And they were probably the first one to be let go, you know, in the types of jobs that we're looking at. So it's just really good to kind of continue to frame up, like, who are the most impacted, right? Generally the population is 56% white in that area, compared to, you know, it's a little bit less than Ramsey County as a whole by about 10%. You have a very diverse community, which is great. 22.3% of the residents are Black or African American, and you have a higher concentration of millennials than most communities. And again, with that COVID lens, if you remember those slides that I showed you of people who are getting unemployed that are under 34, you know, you have a lot of this community has a lot of the, I would say, the most impacted people probably, and you know, it's a good mix of like the people of color that are being impacted, the types of industries that are impacted, the education level, as well as the age range of people impacted. You do have a higher poverty rate than generally than overall Ramsey County. 23, you know, almost 24% of the neighborhood is living below the poverty level. I thought this was really interesting. I didn't know these two statistics till I was working on this, but 41% of the young children residing in these neighborhoods live in single parent households. Why that's important? I mean, I think that's a really important number when you think about all this distance learning and the pressures that, you know, how is this going to affect people trying to train at home, or trying to do job search at home, or do pivot their career, right? I mean, if you mirror that with the people that don't have high school degree or don't have a high school degree, I mean, kids at, you know, being the pressures of a single parent household impact your ability to what kind of supports you might need in order to be successful when it comes to education and job search. And I didn't realize this, but you actually have one of the highest uninsurance rates in the state. 7.5% of residents are uninsured in the Midway area. So the household income approximately is 54,000, house value 206,000, just some baseline statistics. So I think in terms of COVID impact, I think I talked a lot about this already, but, you know, I just want to call out people without college degrees, and certainly without a high school degree, will have a much harder time in recovery. Race will, you know, be a huge factor because, you know, most of the folks that were holding the most vulnerable jobs, and actually, you know, I'm not layering the public health risk on here and the public health impact, but there are a lot of statistics around, you know, around the country that many of the impacts have been disproportionate on the public health side around race. And then obviously the younger workers, you know, holding more of those vulnerable jobs. So in terms of the Midway, you know, here are your industry breakdowns. And this is, you know, and this type of detail comes from, you know, our statistics of how we categorize jobs. And so some of them may seem a little odd, but I think the important thing is to see your healthcare and social assistance. I mean, that is your hugest chunk of the pie of like who's employing folks in your community. You've got, you know, food service, and that would be this light green. I think that's fairly significant. And then education services, and then just a variety of other things. So there's about 777 employers in this neighborhood that we were looking at. The majority have less than 20 employees. I mean, if you look at this, this is quite staggering. And Chad actually asked if I had the data around how many of these businesses were owned by, you know, people of color. And I wasn't able to get that as of last night, but I can try to get that for you. I think if we layered this would be like a really interesting analysis. But I mean, you see that the small business impact here is like huge on the Midway, you know. I mean, you guys are not, this is not a community with lots of large employers. And so that type of support that they need is just unbelievable. I mean, especially through situations like we're going through right now. So, so this was actually done before COVID. So this is, I think this is important to note. What this is looking at is, this was done in the fourth quarter. The last time we could run this was the fourth quarter of 2019. This is showing which sectors have positive growth in jobs, okay, based on pre-COVID. And so if you look at everything on kind of on that is going to my right, you know, when you look at that healthcare and social assistance, like that biggest bar, that is where we were anticipating you were going to have the most growth in job growth. Also the accommodations and food service and arts and entertainment and recreation. And so if you think about that in relation to the industries that I talked to you about that were most impacted by COVID, I think you see that there's a lot of overlap, that the industries that the Midway would see the most economic growth in are the ones that have been most impacted by COVID. And so we're going to have to see, you know, what's going to happen in terms of the recovery, like how many of these, you know, types of things are going to rebound and how many people are actually going to be permanently laid off or be furloughed. And so I'm going to keep going here. Sorry, that's a little blurry, but this is showing like the same kind of idea, but around the actual occupations that are the highest in demand. And so this is kind of going the other way. So the red are showing the growth over the 10 years that we anticipate in terms of jobs in the Midway. We anticipate there'd be a lot of need for nurses. We're seeing that we would be, you know, seeing well, this is showing where your shortage is, I'm sorry. So it is looking at demand, but it's showing where you have a gap. So these are jobs that the Midway we anticipate the Midway would have, but you don't actually have enough people to fill those types of jobs in the red. And then the blue would be, you know, these jobs, you have a plethora of folks and, you know, the demand isn't, you're able to meet that demand and then some. So I don't know if anybody has any questions, but we can go through them all and then we could go back. So, so here are some vulnerability indexes as to the short-term job loss due to COVID. You know, your biggest anticipated short-term job losses are in accommodation and food service, arts, entertainment, and recreation, and all of these, but I think most dramatically in those. And this is looking at employment by industry in the Midway neighborhood and what we think, how many jobs are vulnerable and whether or not, so we can talk through the first one. Like, for example, you know, in Q4 of 2019, you had a little over 2,400 jobs in accommodation and food service. We estimate that actually about almost 1,400 of those are vulnerable due to COVID. So this is actually looking at new job postings between March 15th and May 15th, like actual job postings that companies have made on a variety of sites and on their own sites. So you see that there have been a lot of postings in the Midway area around nurses, nursing assistants, physicians, a few on laborers, cashiers, frontline retail workers. You know, this helps you kind of see who's hiring right now, even during the COVID situation, and which industries are looking for employees right now. And the change in the last column is the change. So let's talk through the three columns. So one is how many jobs were posted. The middle column is the change from the prior period of like 2 months before COVID. So so this is kind of interesting, right? Like 84 jobs were posted for registered nurses. So you might think that's a lot of jobs, right? But that's actually less than between January and March. So it's actually gone down since the previous period, even though that is still your highest job title that's being hired for in the Midway area. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I think, you know, if we send this out, you guys can kind of, you know, dig through the details. Some of it starts to get to just, you know, because it's a smaller area in geography, some of these jobs are getting down to 4 postings, 6 postings. I would say anything, you know, kind of in that first half of this grid is probably more significant, obviously. But But you look at like frontline supervisors and retail workers, right? There's 23 being posted right now in those last 2 months. That's actually up 64% from the previous 2 months. And that's actually down a little bit from like last year. So it's kind of interesting that you have to kind of look at how things were like a little bit before COVID, and then also like go back a year and go, well, what was it like a year ago? These are the employers that actually have posted jobs with those kind of same columns. And so you see Alina has posted for 211 jobs in the post-COVID period, but that's still down 42% from their previous 2 months. And it's down 69% from their previous year. Whereas Health East, they posted 104 jobs, but that's down from the previous 2 months from earlier in the year, but it's actually up substantially from a year ago. So, I mean, there's just a lot of nuances here of what, you know, maybe companies are doing, shifting things, but this is actually based on actual job postings. And so, you know, you look at, yeah, go ahead.
I just want to stop you before we get too far along, because we've got a few questions that I think are going to be more pertinent right now with what information you have. So first question, is the demand factor based on national averages or is it specific to locality?
You mean what do you mean by the demand factor? Like,
if you want to jump in on exactly what part you were referring to.
Yeah, so it was that slide right there.
Yep,
the occupational gaps.
Yep. This is based strictly on the St. Paul Midway neighborhood.
Okay, perfect.
There's nothing national being applied here.
Great. And then can you explain how your 10-year forecasts on growth industries were calculated? What data is Ramsey County relying on for these estimates?
Yeah, I have the full report, which I could send out with all the citations. We worked with Real Time Talent, and they use a variety of so we've got listed as sources like the Bureau of Labor Statistics. We use Talent Neuron. We use they just take a fold of probably half a dozen sources and pull things together. But I'm happy to provide the full report to folks that have a lot more details. We just pulled out a few graphs here just for conversation and discussion's sake. So.
Okay, and a couple other questions before we get going on the rest. Is business size by number of full-time workers or actually including part-time as well?
I think this is FTEs, but I can double check.
I'm wondering if maybe part-time is counted as 0.5 on it too. I know sometimes that happens. Yep. And then what might be the difference between healthcare support and nursing assistance?
You know, those are the job categories that are put into the Department of Labor Statistics. So we could kind of get you the definitions of the specific job titles, but they're actually, when I look at some of these titles, I mean, they do break down to that level. So I don't have the job description, but we can provide that.
Okay, great. Yeah. All right, move along. Thank you.
Okay. So we were on to the companies that are hiring. And I just, I think it's just really interesting to kind of look at this. Like you look at FedEx, they had 32 job postings, which is up from January, which is, makes sense, right? Maybe they have more demand right now. But what's fascinating is that's 30% down from the previous year. So even though, things like look up potentially, even post-COVID for some areas, it's still generally going to, significantly down from the previous year for most people. So, yeah, and you guys, and these are, it's hard because the geographic Midway is fairly small. And so, some of these jobs, like look at Sunrise Bank here, Terry, I see you guys posted one job. So, I mean, it's, it's hard to, I think you got to look at these ones that are like the bigger numbers to really get a feel of it, right? So, so here's some ideas for like the future, okay? And we're gonna talk about, and this is just one way we could think about things, and this is not a perfect model, but you think about when we talked about the jobs that there were a lot of people in, but compared to the jobs that we know we have a need for in the next 10 years in the Midway area. So we could take those jobs that there's a lot of people in, and based on our data, there's people that are customer service reps, there's people that are vocational nurses, medical assistants, you know, whatever we want to pick here. I mean, we could kind of do the analysis on what goes on this wider side. But then how could we take those same skills and find those folks and put them into training and, you know, apprenticeships and whatever else that programs we could to get them to the jobs that you the higher paying jobs that are actually needed by your businesses, right? And so this is the, you know, again, this is like back of the envelope a little bit that I was kind of doing, but you take like personal care aides off that list and you could say, well, home health aides make more money. So let's try to at least get them to that point, right? Or childcare workers, like, you know, maybe. And so, you know, again, not that those other jobs go away, but how can we move people along the continuum, right? And that actually then serves not only the resident who's trying to get higher wages in a more, you know, sustainable job that maybe, you know, is less vulnerable to COVID or other things or other economic cycles, but also that you're helping your businesses meet those needs with people in their community who actually, you know, that is their gap. I mean, if you guys have a huge gap of registered nurses in your community, we should be working, you know, collaboratively with the chamber and with the other organizations in the Midway to figure out how can we get more people to be nurses here in the next few years and really do some concentrated programs around that.
And then Ling, another question is, from where do you draw the job posting data from?
The job posting data actually is pulled from the actual jobs boards of all the businesses. So it kind of trolls all the job boards that are out there and it gets rid of the duplicates. So it actually will go on like Target's job board and grab those. It will go on Indeed and then it somehow the algorithm, you know, eliminates duplicates. All right, so in terms of opportunity, I mean, these are the things I think the chamber might want to think about. Again, these are just back of the envelope, you know, like some of my thoughts, but I'm sure we could have a good, you know, last few minute discussion here. I think closing the tech equity gap. I mean, people need access to technology. They need access to Wi-Fi so that they can do training. I think this is an issue that we have found in our residents that about only half the people have computers. And it is hard to learn on a phone. Lots of people have phones, but I have lots of research that phone literacy does not equate to computer literacy. And also, you know, we've even been anecdotally been told people need help on how to interview on Zoom right now. I mean, it is, you know, if you've never done that before, it could be extremely intimidating. So there's a big tech equity thing that I think we need to address. I think supporting the industry efforts, kind of like what, you know, that previous chart, think about what industries you want to continue to succeed in your community. And we have to close those gaps of what employees that they need, right? I think short-term training to skill up is going to be huge. Right now, if people are on unemployment and if, whether they are or not getting official benefits, we should be using this, I guess, a little bit of a lull time. You know, there are a lot of short-term trainings that people could be doing right now, whether it's in IT, whether it's in healthcare. There are so many trainings that have converted virtual. And so I know on our workforce board, Chad and I've been talking a lot about how do we get more computers in the hands of folks. We're going to be using some of those CARES dollars to pop up more spaces where people can hopefully do training. Focus on the future of work. I think that would be a great conversation for the chamber. I mean, the future of work is going to look really different. You guys are a very service-driven community, and service is going to look different with a public health crisis and beyond. Well, even after the public health crisis, I think lots of businesses are going to rethink the way they do service. And so what does that mean? Is that AI? Is that IT? Like, how do we start having those conversations? And then mentors. I mean, I've read so much about the value of mentorship and business mentorship. People are going to need individualized support and coaching, whether they're business owners, whether they're residents. You know, if you've been bussing tables for, you know, 5 to 7 years and now you realize I need to do a change, you can't do that without more support. You need someone kind of like talking to you about what your options are. And we do some of that, but I think it helps if there's more of that out in the community, and we're going to be working on that. So maybe that's a partnership potential. We just finished an EMS Academy with the City of St. Paul Fire Department. And one of the women, I mean, she's been a single mom, and she said she's bussed tables for 9 years. And without one-on-one mentorship, I think she would have had a really hard time to switch to a healthcare career and be able to pass an EMS test, you know. But that was an EMS training only takes about 8 weeks, you know. I mean, can people, and you know, right now, if you are getting unemployment insurance, normally people can't take time off to do training. So I feel like we have this like sweet spot, especially on people who are getting unemployment benefits. We need to be putting them training in front of them. And then entrepreneurialism obviously is a, you know, a big strength of this area. I think more than ever, you know, where do people have ideas, and how can we as a community invest in them? I think that's going to be something, you know, hopefully chambers can take part in. And I've also read some interesting studies on young adults, right? We saw how many are unemployed. Like maybe we need a community jobs program for young adults in some different communities and neighborhoods, and we should be talking about how businesses and, you know, and government should be partnering in some of those conversations. So I want to leave a lot of time for conversations. I just wanted to quickly mention we are going to be launching a new job board here fairly quickly here in late this month, early June. It is going to be free for businesses and residents to use. What I'm excited about is people are going to be able to search by transit, and they're going to be able to look for jobs that are accessible by the Green Line. I think that's a really exciting thing that we're going to be doing that supports the work of the Midway area. So I think, Chad, I want to leave as much time for questions because I know there was a lot of information.
Great, and we do have some. I'm going to start with, I have a two-parter from Lynn Thompson. What are requirements for financial assistance from CARES Act funds? How are we giving financial assistance to those who don't qualify for public benefits due to immigration status or are fearful because of the public charge rule? And the follow-up from Len is also English language learners were not included in those who are more highly impacted by job losses. How are CARES Act funds being used to support ELL?
Yeah, so I'll go backwards. We did call out ELL, and I didn't call it out in my slide, but in our actual funding target populations, they did get called out. In terms of the undocumented, we're still getting some guidance around the CARES dollars as to how much we can push there, being that these are federal funds, and we're literally learning every day what we can and can't use that money for. What I will share with Chad, and that he can hopefully share out with the rest of you, is Ramsey County joined a collaborative with the city of Minneapolis and Visit St. Paul and Meet Minneapolis and Visit Roseville. There is a hospitality and event worker fund that has been established to provide some financial assistance to people who work in hospitality. And they are not asking many questions besides what, you know, where you work. I mean, I think they just need to confirm that you worked in one of those industries. And so that has been a source of support for undocumented workers. In terms of the financial assistance, that is not my area, but I know that they do have things built in that CARES funding around the criteria, and I could pass that along to Chad, or a contact to Chad.
All right. Another question, Ling, and this is something kind of that we're working on right now. Can we offer free Wi-Fi assistance to residents similar to what Minneapolis has been doing?
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking a lot about that, whether it's Wi-Fi or more access to devices. The tricky thing with our CARES dollars is we have to make sure that it's serving people who've been COVID impacted. And I know from my presentation today, talking to you all, there's no debate as to the depth and breadth of all the people that have been COVID impacted, right? But we have to be somewhat careful around these federal dollars. And so we are talking to the St. Paul Library to see if we can expand some of their hotspot lending and more computer lending. We do have this idea about a digital kind of backpack that would basically provide not only the Wi-Fi access, but a computer, but also a connection to North Star digital literacy programming, as well as a career navigator, kind of all into one package. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is most of what we do with our CARES dollars has to focus around employment, and there has to be some way that I can tie whatever I'm giving out to the community to employment, right? And if we just give Wi-Fi access, that's probably a little too broad, and I have to tighten it just a little bit, if that makes sense, around the CARES dollars.
You know, Ling, we historically have had a lot of manufacturing jobs in the Midway neighborhood, and many of them are still there. And there's a lot of opportunities for people that don't have a college degree, that don't have a high school education, and they can lead to great careers. And Terry is asking a similar question here about how do we think differently and provide training to the big pool of non-high school grads?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a full-on community effort, right? I mean, as a part of our job board, I'm planning on rolling out like a list of all the short-term training programs too on there. But I think we could use, like networks like the chamber and our different, folks that we know in the community to get the word out that if you are, especially normally people have a hard time taking a time off to do training because they still need to pay their bills, right? And that's always been kind of a struggle to why people can't move out of just the job they're in. They're kind of stuck in a job, but they can't take the time off to do something different. Well, that might have changed a little bit for some people if they're on some getting some sort of unemployment benefits. I mean, if we can, again, around like having more mentors, having support, if people can kind of convince people that this is your opportunity to invest in yourself, like St. Paul and Minneapolis have a great partnership around tech hire. I mean, those are free trainings, the majority of them, if you are low income. And so we are a partner there and we support that training. Also, we need to get the word out about the Dislocated Worker Program. I mean, the Dislocated Worker Program has traditionally served people who have been on unemployment, who are in jobs that are termed unlikely to return. And we're trying to get a broader definition of what unlikely to return could mean. And if we could widen some of that, like a dislocated worker can pay for people to do all kinds of training. So those programs, some of these programs exist. We just have to be able to be a better conduit to sharing. There's a lot of things happening at your ABE, at the Hub Center. People need to know they can go take advantage of that, and so that might be, but I think we need to be somewhat strategic, right? We're not trying to just put people in jobs. Like if our goal is really to get people to be registered nurses or get IT jobs, like let's be really thoughtful about sharing the right messages, why that's a good idea, what the earning potential is, who can support you, who can help you, where you can get an internship, like what are the things you need along the way to get on that path.
Yeah, and Ruth from the Hub Center is on here as well, and I think it's going to be even more important going forward for sure. People looking at getting education as an adult. Dr. Bruce Corey is on saying, can you talk a little bit more about the $15 million each going into workforce and business development? And I swear I didn't plant this question, but he also said, can the chamber get some of these funding or partner in funding to address the areas you identified?
Yeah, and I think around the chamber part, there is a set of dollars around helping with outreach. And I think that would be a really good spot potentially that we could talk to the chamber about to make sure we get these messagings of these trainings and these other new programs out. Around the small business assistance, I really do think I want Chad to get some information from Carrie for you all, because literally our jobs are changing every moment with this legislation. I don't want to give any wrong information about that program, but I do know it's going to be targeted toward micro businesses, and they are really going to be working hard to try to like find small and minority businesses to support, and I think that's the direction of our board. We're very concerned about, I mean, she has the statistic, but it is an astronomical number, the number of small businesses that are in Ramsey County that are under like 20 employees or 30 employees. I mean, it is a high statistic. In terms of the workforce stuff, I mean, it is a lot around, you will see, some changes around where we're going to be popping up some new spaces for people to get support in the Midway area. There will be more access there. We're doing some work with North Star Digital Literacy. I'm trying to think of what else. And then investing in those young adult programs. I mean, to me, we need to have more training programs for young adults. Because that is a huge part of the recovery. So again, back to these opportunities. I mean, I don't want to, over push, what the chamber should be doing, but I think having a conversation around some of these or your other ideas would be really a good idea, and to think of where you want to put your energy. But I would love for all the chambers or different groups to start having kind of a recovery task force, because, you know, it would be really good that everybody starts thinking about what is your role as a part of the business and the workforce recovery aspect, you know, and how can the county help support that, or how could we work together? So.
Great. We've got two questions left here on the chat. IT is obviously a big industry going forward. And I know on the Workforce Innovation Board, Ling, that's one of our priorities.
Yep.
And Lori Gleason here is asking about short-term training. Can there be a possibility for more workers to be trained in IT infrastructure?
Yeah, there's, I mean, that already exists, and we're making it more robust, right, as we speak. But I mean, if you go out on the St. Paul, and we can share this through Chad, the St. Paul City website under MSP Tech Hire, and their work around IT training, there are several short-term trainings already on there that are available. Also in your area is like Hussein's organization, new foundation, or new foundations. There's what is the other one? Transcend IT. I mean, there's like a lot of these short-term training organizations that are amazing, and we need to do a better job at promoting them and also supporting maybe how we can get more people into them. But they also need like the business support, right? I mean, every company is an IT company. And so I think, you know, all the pieces would be not only that they get that training, but is someone willing to give them that work experience to be able to, you know, kind of leverage as a while or after they do that training. So having that employer support is really key.
Russ Peterson from Clever Architecture has a really interesting question. One of the things that is going to help boost pay and jobs is going to be a new formula for real estate lease and rental per square foot per person. With more square feet per person, there may need to be some changes there. I wonder if the state and county are working with real estate professionals to figure out how that happens for everybody to move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys should do like a big meeting of some brainstorming of these ideas and forward them all to us, right? Because we need these ideas to go, which ones should we be working on as a county, and figure out what I mean, you guys know boots on the ground as the community, what types of things might support your neighborhood or your area. And I think more than ever, like I was leaning more toward this anyway, even pre-COVID, but I think we have to really understand our like micro like neighborhoods and like East Side and you guys, and you know, like different areas just a lot more, because I mean the ecosystem for success really is contained there. And I think just being able to connect all the pieces and ensure you have the things that you need there to help the residents and businesses connect. And that's one reason why I think we were excited about the job board, is to be able to have people, you know, if you live in an area where you need the green line to get to work, there should be a way for you to just search by that instead of have to like find a more difficult way to figure out, you know, what you need to do to get to a job. So that's one exciting thing about the job board, is just being able to isolate some of those areas. The job board also has, and I know I haven't been reading the chat in detail, but I saw Bruce's question around the job board. It does have a map feature. And so you can imagine the map, the map of Ramsey County would be on there, and it'll show all the jobs by like kind of those little flags, right? And so you can expand and zoom in on an area and say, I'm looking for a job and I want to work along this road or in this neighborhood, and you will be able to see that visually.
Great. Well, I think, yeah, the Midway is so well positioned for that, Ling, in being in between the downtowns, being so close to all the colleges and universities. And Tanya here just said, thank you, Ling, and all for attending this morning's conversation. She's got a link here for the small business loan. Tony's saying thank you. We got just a couple minutes left. So Ling, just one other question I have. You know, it's always been a dream of mine thinking about, as you mentioned earlier, so many households in the Midway don't have college degrees. And I think we have so many colleges and universities in the Midway neighborhood or nearby, very accessible by transit like the U of M. It'd be great to find a way to get a pipeline for so many of those students to go to the colleges nearby and then to get connected to employers in the community so they can also set themselves up for a job which could lead to a career and they can stay close to home. Mm-hmm. Ling, is there any insight you have on how we can do that as a community?
You know, it's interesting because, I mean, I'm very supportive of our college and university system, but I think it's an opportunity that they're going to have to come to the table and try to figure out how to pivot a bit, because I think this idea that people need, you know, multiple years of education is just really going to be shifting. I mean, I knew this was going to happen, like, at some point. I didn't think it'd happen this quickly, right? COVID's just going to make this happen very quickly. The idea of badges or like quick term certifications, like on the job training, these are things that employers are going to start to demand, because the environment and the ecosystem in which we work is just changing so quickly. You get put on a project. What do you need to know? I'm going to invest in 2 or 3 weeks for you, and you're going to get this badge or certification, and I know you can take this project, right? And so not that I want to dismiss that the value of long-term like career path education, but I do think that like colleges and universities are going to have to shift a little bit to be able to provide more short-term training in a while, you know, because I think the industries are going to demand it. The environment's changing too quickly. And so I see your point that there should be more collaborative and more partnerships there. And that would be a really interesting conversation of how they can help with that. And I think traditionally, and I know there's been work being done, and maybe you know, some of the educators on the call could elaborate at some point, but you know, the barriers to get into some of those programs have been hard for a lot of folks, you know, the AccuPlacer and those kind of like entrance level type things. And so I think there's been a pop-up of a lot of short-term trainings that don't have a lot of those barriers. And again, where do mentors fit in, and where do other community supports and other things to help people be successful? You know, I think there's actually room in the ecosystem for everybody. It's just everyone trying to kind of tool around what they can do best. So.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Ling. Looks like we're going to end exactly on time. Thanks everybody for attending. I hope you can join us next week. Again, this is part 1 of a 5-part series. Next Thursday morning at 8, we're going to be back talking about community. It's going to be a very interesting look. We're going to have a professor from St. Thomas. We're also going to have Catherine Reed Day, who can talk a little bit more about specifically the Midway and the neighboring communities to the Midway. And another event we have next week, we're finding that social media is becoming more and more important right now as a way of marketing yourself during a time when you can't see people face to face. We are going to be joined by a state fair expert next Wednesday on social media and how to properly use the tools. And speaking of the state fair, it sounds like tomorrow their board is meeting, and we're going to find out tomorrow whether or not we are going to have the Great Minnesota Get Together this year. So stay tuned for that. Again, thanks everybody for joining. We will send out an email later today with the PowerPoint, the recording, and more information for you. Thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chad.
Thanks, Ling.
Yeah, you're welcome.